A young girl runs toward the front door of her house. She hears music, laughter, the sound of celebration. Her father has won the battle. He's coming home victorious, alive, honored. She grabs a tambourine, bursts through the door, and dances down the road to meet Jephthah, first one out to welcome the conquering hero. When her father sees her, his face doesn't light up with joy. It collapses in horror. He tears his clothes. He cries out in anguish, because weeks earlier, in a moment of desperation, he made a vow to God. Whatever came out of his house first when he returned home would be sacrificed as a burnt offering, and the first thing to come out is his daughter, his only child. Welcome to Forgotten Scriptures, where we uncover the Bible's most shocking, violent, and controversial stories. Today we're diving into one of the most heartbreaking and debated passages in all of Scripture, a warrior judge of Israel who made a reckless vow and kept it at the most devastating cost imaginable. This is a story that forces us to ask hard questions about faith, foolishness, sacrifice, and whether obedience to a vow can ever justify what should never have been promised. If you're ready for a story that has haunted readers for thousands of years, hit that subscribe button right now. You're in Forgotten Scriptures. To understand the tragedy of Jephthah's vow, we need to understand who Jephthah was and the world he lived in. This is the period of the Judges, around 1100 BCE, one of the darkest and most chaotic eras in Israel's history. The book of Judges repeatedly says, "In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit." It was a time of spiritual confusion, moral collapse, and constant warfare with surrounding nations. Judges rose and fell, and Israel cycled endlessly through sin, oppression, crying out to God, and temporary deliverance. Jephthah himself was an outcast from birth. He was the son of Gilead, but his mother was a prostitute. When Gilead's legitimate sons grew up, they drove Jephthah away, saying, "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family because you are the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled to the land of Tob, where he gathered a gang of adventurers, essentially mercenaries, and outlaws, and became their leader. He was a skilled warrior, a born leader but rejected, bitter, and desperate to prove himself. Years later, when the Ammonites attacked Israel with overwhelming force, the elders of Gilead, the same people who had rejected Jephthah, came, crawling back to him. They said, "Come and be our commander, so we can fight the Ammonites." Jephthah's response drips with sarcasm and pain. "Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now, when you're in trouble?" But they begged him, promising to make him head over all who lived in Gilead if he led them to victory. Jephthah agreed. So Jephthah became commander of Israel's forces. Before the battle, he tried diplomacy, sending messengers to the Ammonite king to negotiate. But the king refused to listen. War was inevitable, and it's here, on the edge of battle, that Jephthah makes the vow that will destroy his life. The text says, "Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah." This is important. Jephthah has divine empowerment for the battle ahead. God is with him. Victory is already assured. But instead of trusting that, Jephthah tries to bargain with God. He makes a vow. "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Let's pause and dissect what just happened. First, this vow was completely unnecessary. The Spirit of the Lord was already on Jephthah. God had already chosen him to deliver Israel. Jephthah didn't need to make a deal with God. He already had God's backing. But Jephthah, shaped by rejection and insecurity, feels like he needs to secure the victory himself. He tries to manipulate God into guaranteeing success by offering a dramatic sacrifice in return. Second, the vow is dangerously vague. "Whatever comes out of the door of my house." In ancient Israel, animals like goats, sheep, or donkeys might wander in and out of homes, especially in rural areas. Jephthah probably expected an animal, but he also could have expected a servant, a family member, anyone. The Hebrew word whatever can mean whoever. Scholars have debated for centuries whether Jephthah anticipated a human sacrifice or assumed it would be an animal. Either way, the vow was reckless, hasty, and unwise. Third, human sacrifice was explicitly forbidden by God's law. Leviticus is clear. Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech, for you must not profane the name of your God. Deuteronomy reinforces it. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire. This wasn't a gray area. God hated child sacrifice. It was one of the main reasons he commanded Israel to drive out the Canaanites. So if Jephthah was contemplating human sacrifice, he was contemplating something God had explicitly condemned. But Jephthah makes the vow anyway, and God gives him victory. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel-Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. Total, overwhelming victory. Jephthah returns home a hero, head held high, probably already imagining the glory, the honor, the vindication, after years of rejection. And then comes the moment that shatters everything. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of she was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. Picture that scene. A teenage girl, full of joy and pride, runs out of the house dancing, celebrating her father's victory. She's the first one out. The only one, his only child. Jephthah's reaction is immediate and visceral. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." Notice the language. You have brought me down. Eblamasir, as if it's her fault for being excited to see him, as if she should have known not to come out first. This is a man crushed by his own foolishness, lashing out even as he realizes what he's done. His daughter's response is stunning in its maturity and submission. "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised. Now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites." She doesn't beg. She doesn't cry. She doesn't try to escape. She accepts the vow as binding, but she makes one request. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." This detail is crucial. She doesn't say, "I'm about to die." She says, "I will never marry." She mourns her virginity, not her life at least not explicitly. This has led some scholars to argue that Jephthah didn't actually kill his daughter, but instead dedicated her to lifelong service at the tabernacle, keeping her a perpetual virgin. They point to the fact that the text emphasizes her virginity and that later in the passage it says Israelite women went annually to commemorate or lament the daughter of Jephthah, not to mourn her death. But the majority of scholars, both ancient and modern, read the text as describing an actual human sacrifice. R-S-Y. First, the vow explicitly says burnt offering. That's not language for temple service. That's sacrificed language. The Hebrew word Allah always refers to an animal or a person completely consumed by fire on an altar. Second, the text says Jephthah did to her as he had vowed. If he had vowed a burnt offering, then he fulfilled that vow. The text gives no indication he substituted the vow with something else. Third, the mourning of her virginity makes sense in the context of sacrifice. In ancient Israel, a woman's primary legacy was her children. To die a virgin meant dying without descendants, without legacy, without the hope of contributing to Israel's future. She wasn't just mourning death, she was mourning the complete erasure of her existence from the story of Israel. And finally, the book of Judges is about Israel's progressive moral collapse. Each judge gets worse, each story gets darker. Human sacrifice fits the trajectory of a nation spiraling into chaos and doing what was right in their own eyes. So after 2 months, Jephthah's daughter returns from the hills, and the text states flatly, after the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed. No details. No description of the act, just the cold, brutal fact. He kept his vow. His only daughter, the girl who danced out to celebrate his victory, became a burnt offering on an altar, because her father made a foolish vow to secure a victory God had already promised him. The story ends with this haunting note. From this comes the Israelite tradition that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. She doesn't even get a name. She's known forever as the daughter of Jephthah, a nameless victim of her father's recklessness, remembered by other young women who understood the tragedy of a life cut short before it truly began. Now here's where the story gets even more complicated. Centuries later, in the New Testament book of Hebrews, the author lists the heroes of faith, people who trusted God and did mighty things. And Jephthah is on that list. Hebrews 11 says, "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. How can a man who made a reckless vow and possibly sacrificed his own daughter be listed as a hero of faith?" Some argue that Jephthah's faith is seen in his willingness to keep his vow, no matter the cost. Others suggest that his faith is evident in his trust that God would give him victory, even if the vow itself was foolish. Still others point out that Hebrews is highlighting Jephthah's faith in leading Israel to victory, not commending every action he took. The text can affirm his faith in battle while still condemning his vow. Heroes in the Bible are rarely perfect. They're deeply flawed people through whom God works, despite their sin. So what do we learn from this tragic, horrifying story? First, rash vows made in desperation often lead to devastating consequences. Jephthah made his vow out of insecurity, trying to control the outcome, trying to bind God to his terms. But God doesn't need our bargaining. He doesn't require dramatic vows to secure his help. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus specifically warns against making oaths, saying, "All you need to say is simply yes or no." Jephthah's vow is a cautionary tale about the danger of making promises to God in moments of fear or desperation without thinking through the implications. Second, not every vow should be kept. This sounds controversial, but it's biblically sound. Leviticus 5 provides instructions for breaking sinful vows through confession and sacrifice. The law recognized that sometimes people make foolish promises, and keeping them would be worse than breaking them. Jephthah should have broken his vow. He should have gone to the priests, confessed his foolishness, offered the prescribed sacrifices, and spared his daughter. Keeping a vow that requires sin to fulfill is not faithfulness, it's stubbornness disguised as piety. Third, religious devotion can become toxic when it's driven by insecurity rather than love. Jephthah's vow wasn't motivated by devotion to God. It was motivated by his need to prove himself, to secure victory, to finally be somebody after a lifetime of rejection. When our relationship with God is driven by performance, by proving ourselves, by trying to earn approval, we end up making terrible decisions in his name. True faith rests in who God is, not in what we can offer him. Fourth, the victims of others' foolishness are often innocent. Jephthah's daughter did nothing wrong. She didn't make the vow. She wasn't consulted. She simply ran out to celebrate her father's victory, and it cost her everything. This story forces us to reckon with the reality that sin has collateral damage. Our bad decisions, our reckless promises, our desperate bargains with God don't just affect us. They devastate the people we love. Fifth, not everything in the Bible is prescriptive. Just because something happens in Scripture doesn't mean it's approved by God. The book of Judges records Israel's descent into moral chaos, showing us where doing what is right in your own eyes leads. Jephthah's sacrifice of his daughter isn't commanded by God, endorsed by God, or celebrated by the text. It's presented as a tragedy, a warning of what happens when people mix devotion to God with pagan practices and desperate bargaining. And finally, Jephthah's daughter points us forward to another sacrifice. God the Father had an only child, too, his son. But the difference is staggering. Jephthah made a foolish vow and sacrificed his daughter to fulfill it. God made a promise to save humanity and sacrificed his son to fulfill it. Jephthah's vow was unnecessary. God had already given him victory. God's sacrifice was necessary. We had no way to save ourselves. Jephthah's daughter was an innocent victim of her father's recklessness. Jesus was an innocent victim who volunteered to take our place. Jephthah's daughter is remembered but unnamed. Jesus is named, known, worshipped, and alive forever. The daughter of Jephthah died because her father made a foolish promise, trying to secure something God had already guaranteed. She has no name in the text, no voice beyond her one request, no legacy except the annual mourning of young women who came after her. She stands as a permanent warning in Scripture. Reckless vows, Desperate bargains and religious devotion, divorce from wisdom lead to tragedy, not triumph. Next time on Forgotten Scriptures, we're diving into another story of violence and divine judgment from the book of Joshua. A man sees something valuable in the ruins of Jericho. He takes it. He hides it. And because of his secret sin, 36 Israelite soldiers die in the next battle. When he's discovered, he and his entire family are stoned and burned in a valley that becomes a memorial to the cost of hidden disobedience. You won't want to miss the shocking story of Achan and the forbidden treasure. If this story affected you, drop a comment and tell me. Do you think Jephthah actually sacrificed his daughter, or did he dedicate her to lifelong service? Should he have broken his vow? Why is he listed in Hebrews 11 as a man of faith? I want to hear your thoughts. And hit that subscribe button so you don't miss another episode of the most controversial, violent, and forgotten stories in the Bible. This is Forgotten Scriptures, where the Bible's darkest stories come to light.